Montana Territory, 1881, the wind howled across the high plains as the stagecoach wheels crunched over the frozen dirt road toward the town of Red Elk Crossing. Inside, 20-year-old Laurel Cantrell held her breath, fingers tightening around the frayed edge of her carpetbag. Her wrists were bruised, her lips split, and her ribs ached with every bump in the road. But it was the hollow behind her chest that hurt the most. She had said no. And for that, Mr. Vernon Griggs had beaten her. The man who had sent for her through an ad in the Denver Sentinel had not liked hearing "I changed my mind" when she stepped off the stage 5 days ago. He dragged her to his cabin outside of town and made it clear he had paid money and expected a wife. When she refused, he put his fists where his vows should have been. Laurel had escaped in the night, barefoot and bleeding, running through snow and sagebrush until she made it back to the post station. The clerk had taken pity, hidden her until the stage came through again, and now she was headed west with no plan beyond getting away. She did not cry. She had done enough of that the first night. The town came into view as the sun dipped low behind the mountains. Red Elk Crossing was small, maybe 24 buildings along a muddy street, with a livery, a mercantile, and a single saloon with crooked shutters. The coach stopped with a groan of tired springs. Laurel stepped down, her ankles wobbling. She had nothing but the clothes she wore and a heart full of shame. "Ma'am," a deep voice said behind her. She turned fast, flinching before she saw the man. He stood tall, with a wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his eyes. His coat was frayed but clean, and he had the lean, sun-worn look of someone who worked hard and spoke little. His eyes were a sharp blue, steady and calm. "I did not mean to scare you," he said. "Name's Quillan Graves. I run a cattle operation west of here." "You look like you could use help." She stared at him, unsure if she should run or say thank you. "I do not want anything from you," he added, quiet. "Just saw you limping." Laurel hesitated, then nodded. "I need a place to stay." "Just for a night." Quillan glanced toward the saloon, then back at her. "You will not be safe there. Come with me. I have a small cabin out past the ridge. You can rest, eat, and be on your way when you are ready." "I do not know you," she said. "No, you do not," he answered. "But I promise you this, Miss Cantrell, Laurel Cantrell." He tipped his hat. "Miss Cantrell, no one will hurt you again." Something in his voice, low, even, certain, cut through her fear. She nodded once. They rode out of town on horseback, her carpetbag tied behind his saddle, the land stretching wide and gold beneath the dying light. His horse was calm, and he kept his distance, letting her ride in silence. She noticed how he watched her injuries without asking questions, how he offered her his coat when the wind picked up, and how he never looked at her the way Vernon Griggs had. It was dark by the time they reached the cabin. It was small, built with care, with smoke drifting from the chimney. Inside, the fire burned low, stew bubbled in a pot, and a dog curled up by the hearth. Quillan handed her a blanket, then set a tin plate on the table. "Eat, you can have the bed, I will sleep out here." She sat, hands trembling as she picked up the spoon. She had not eaten in 2 days. He turned away to give her privacy, kneeling by the fire to stir the logs. When she finished, her voice barely rose above the crackle of the flames. "Thank you." He looked over his shoulder. "You are welcome." That night she lay in his bed, clean and warm for the first time in a long while. She watched the shadows flicker across the ceiling, listening to the quiet rhythm of his breathing from the floor. In the morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and bread. He had baked biscuits. She sat at the table, eyes red-rimmed from sleep. "Why are you helping me?" He poured her coffee. "Because someone should have stopped it, and I was not there." Her eyes filled. "He said I was his property, that he paid for me." "You are not property," Quillan said. "You are a person. You said no. That should have been enough." Laurel stared at him. "Why are you alone out here?" He picked up his mug without answering right away. "Lost my wife 5 years back. Fever took her. Been quieter since." "I am sorry." He nodded once. They passed the next days in gentle quiet. She helped gather eggs, swept the cabin, and learned where the creek ran cold and clear. He never asked her about what happened, but she saw the way his hands paused when she winced, or the way his eyes watched her face when she thought he was not looking. One morning she found a small mirror and hairbrush left on the table for her. She held it in her hand for a long time. "You did not have to do this," she said. "I know," Quillan replied. "But I wanted to." Later, when she stood near the barn watching the horses graze, he came to stand beside her. The wind tugged at her skirts. She looked up at him. "I am not sure what I am supposed to do next," she admitted. "You do not have to know yet," he said. "You are safe here." She turned, tears stinging her eyes. "You really mean that?" He did not answer with words. He reached out slowly, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, and let his hand fall away. That night she dreamed of a home with a porch and laughter inside it. And when she woke, she no longer felt alone. The morning sky stretched pale and cloudless over the hills, the chill biting sharper now that the snow had hardened into patches of glittering crust. Laurel stepped out onto the porch, pulling one of Quillan's spare shawls tight around her shoulders. A pair of deer stood motionless by the tree line, their ears twitching before they bounded off through the underbrush. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. "You slept through sunrise," Quillan said, setting a tin cup on the porch rail beside her. "I used to wake early," she replied, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm tin. "But lately, I sleep heavier, think I might be catching up." He leaned against the post. "That's nothing to apologize for." She watched the steam rise from the surface of the coffee. "I keep waiting to feel more like myself." He didn't speak right away. "Then, maybe the self you were before wasn't treated right, Laurel." She looked at him. His face was quiet, unreadable, but there was no pity in it, just truth. He ran a gloved hand along the porch rail, brushing away a thin crust of frost. "I have to ride out to the north fence today. A tree came down across the line. If you're comfortable here, I'll be back by dusk." She hesitated. "Could I come with you?" He straightened slightly. "It's a long ride and the ground's slick in places." "I can manage." His eyes searched hers for a moment. "All right, saddle's light, you'll ride well enough." The ride out took most of the morning. The horses picked carefully through the snowy brush, hooves cracking ice where stream beds cut the land. Quillan led with a steady hand, stopping once to check a hoof when his gelding stumbled on a rock. Laurel felt the cold in her knees, but the wind on her face did something good to her thoughts, like it was blowing some of the heavy fog away. She watched the way Quillan moved in the saddle, deliberate but relaxed, the way his eyes flicked toward her every so often, checking without asking. When they reached the broken fence, Quillan dismounted and pulled a coil of wire from his saddlebag. "You'll want to stay clear while I cut this." She crouched near a stump and watched him work. He moved methodically, securing each post with practiced precision. The fallen pine had splintered the rails, and it took time to pull the trunk free. Laurel didn't speak. She just listened to the rasp of the saw and the creak of wood under strain. When he paused to wipe his brow, she asked, "How long have you lived out here?" He straightened and looked toward the hills. 7 years. "My brother and I came up from Wyoming after the war. He stayed 2 winters. I stayed on." She tilted her head. "Why? Didn't see much in the world worth going back to." He glanced down at the wire. "This land's hard, but it doesn't lie to you." Laurel stood, brushing her skirt clean. "Hard doesn't scare me." He tied off the last length of wire and looked at her. "I don't imagine much does." They made camp near a line of cottonwoods before turning back. Quillan built a fire and heated beans in a dented tin pot. Laurel sat across from him, legs tucked beneath her, the sky bruising to dusk above them. He handed her a plate and nodded toward the flames. "You picked up the reins well today." "I used to ride with my uncle," she said, "before my parents passed. He kept horses for the army. I was the only girl, but he said I sat straighter than the boys." Quillan smiled faintly and tossed a twig into the fire. "I believe it." She stirred her beans slowly. "I never thought I'd end up running. I thought if I did what was expected, I'd be safe." "You were wrong," he said, not unkindly. "I know that now." The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The fire cracked softly, and above them, the first stars pricked through the dark. He shifted, pulling a flask from his coat and offering it across the flames. "It's just cider, keeps the cold off." She took it, sipped, and handed it back. "Thank you." As he tucked it away, he met her eyes. "You don't owe me thanks, not for any of this." "I know," she said, "but I still feel it." Later, as they rode home under a quarter moon, the snow glowed faintly on the fields. Laurel leaned forward in the saddle, her breath fogging in front of her. Quillan rode just ahead, his silhouette steady and known now. She didn't feel lost anymore. Not entirely. When they reached the cabin, he helped her down, his hand lingering at her waist just long enough to steady her. She didn't pull away. Inside, the dog lifted its head and thumped its tail once before settling again. Laurel hung up her shawl and turned to face him. "I'd like to stay," she said. "Not just tonight." He didn't move, didn't speak, but something softened in his face. "I don't mean I expect anything," she added quickly. "Only that I want to be somewhere that's mine to choose." His voice was quiet. "You'd be welcome." She nodded, then reached for the kettle. "I'll make tea." As the water heated and the fire climbed higher, he stood near the hearth, watching her move through his space like she belonged. And for the first time in years, Quillan felt the shape of something returning, something warm and slow and sure. He didn't say the words. He didn't have to. But when she poured his cup and handed it to him with steady hands, her fingers brushed his, and she didn't let go right away. And he didn't pull back. By late February, the snow along the ridge had begun to pull back, bearing patches of dull grass and thaw-black earth. The days still carried a bite, but the sun lingered longer on the horizon, and the creek behind the cabin ran louder with meltwater. Laurel stood near the edge of the corral, watching Quillan work a young sorrel colt through its first halter. The horse tossed its head, unsure, but Quillan's movements stayed calm and unhurried. The rhythm of his work reminded her of the way he moved through the cabin, steady, deliberate, never wasteful. She leaned against the fence rail, content to watch. She hadn't asked him yet, but she'd been taking on more around the homestead, splitting kindling when he was out moving cattle, mending the torn sleeve of his work shirt without being told. It helped her settle her thoughts, gave her hands something honest to do. When the colt finally yielded and let Quillan stroke its neck, he looked over at her. "I was thinking," she said, brushing her fingers over the rough wood, "about taking the wagon into town tomorrow. There's cloth I need from the mercantile, and I thought maybe I'd ask after work." His brows lifted. "You looking to leave?" "No," she said, quick and certain, "but I'd like to earn what I use, and I'm not afraid of labor." He nodded slowly. "There's an older couple runs the laundry behind the livery. They've been needing help, far as I've heard." She pushed a strand of hair out of her eyes. "Then I'll ask them." Later, while she gathered eggs from the coop, she found a feather tucked inside the nest box, striped gray and white. She held it between her fingers and smiled to herself. It felt like a small offering from the land itself. That night, as she pulled the quilt higher around her shoulders, she spoke without turning. "Do you ever miss talking to someone? Not just passing words, but real talk?" There was a pause before Quillan answered from the armchair near the hearth. "Sometimes, mostly I figured I'd said all I needed to say." She shifted to face him. "I don't always know what to say. But I think I'd like to learn how to talk to you." His eyes met hers across the quiet room. "Then I'll learn how to listen better." The next morning, she hitched the wagon herself. Quillan stood back, letting her work through the harness. When she climbed onto the bench and took the reins, he passed up a wrapped bundle. "Bread and cheese. You'll be gone past noon." "I'll be back by dusk." He nodded once, but his eyes lingered on her as she turned the team toward the trail. Red Elk Crossing looked different now. Not smaller, but less threatening. Laurel walked with her head up and her shoulders square as she crossed the street toward the laundry. Inside, the air was thick with steam and lye. A tall woman with creased hands and a red kerchief tied around her head looked up from a boiling tub. "I heard you were looking for help," Laurel said. "I was," the woman replied. "You know how to use a mangle?" "Not yet, but I learn fast." The woman studied her for a moment. "And you're not afraid of blisters?" "I've had worse." By midday, her fingers were raw and her back ached, but there was a satisfaction in the way the wet sheets snapped clean across the line. The woman Martha grunted once in approval and pressed a coin into her hand before Laurel left. As she stepped back onto the street, she caught sight of a figure down near the saloon. Vernon Griggs. He hadn't seen her, but her breath hitched all the same. He leaned against the hitch rail, talking to a man she didn't know, his laugh sharp and familiar. She turned quickly. cutting behind the mercantile and circling wide to the wagon. The ride home was slow, her hands tight on the reins until the trees swallowed the road behind her. Quillan was standing near the porch when she arrived. He took one look at her face and stepped forward. Something happened. She climbed down. He's still there. He didn't ask who, he didn't need to. Did he see you? No. He glanced toward the ridge where the last of the light was fading. You're safe here, Laurel. She looked up at him, her voice low. I know, but I don't want to hide. Not forever. You won't. She hesitated, then reached for his hand. I want to stay, she said, steady now. I want to build something here with you, his fingers wrapped around hers, firm and sure. Then we will. The first Saturday of March brought wind that scraped the valley raw and sent the cattle pressing into the lee side of the hills. Laurel pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped out to feed the hens, her boots crunching over the frost-glazed ground. The sky overhead was a flat, pewter gray, the kind that made the air feel heavy without the promise of snow. Quillan had left at dawn to help an older rancher mend a creek crossing 2 miles off. He'd said he'd be back before supper, and she'd nodded, not needing more. Inside, the cabin held its quiet warmth. Laurel stirred the embers in the stove and added another piece of split pine. She'd been rising earlier, taking to small tasks without being asked, repairing seams, boiling soap, even setting out nails and fresh oil for the lanterns before dusk. The rhythm of the days had settled into something steady and low, like a river running beneath winter ice. She was drying her hands after scrubbing the floorboards when a knock came at the door, 3 quick raps, then silence. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't been expecting anyone. She reached for the rifle Quillan kept behind the door, not lifting it, just bracing her hand on the stock as she opened it a crack. A woman stood on the stoop, wrapped in a long green wool coat, her skin wind-chapped and her dark eyes sharp with weariness. You Laurel Cantrell? She asked, voice hoarse from the cold. Laurel opened the door wider. I am, the woman exhaled, her shoulders easing. Name's Clara Dorsey. I work at the boarding house near the freight depot. I heard what happened in Elk Crossing. Laurel didn't answer right away. Clara went on. Griggs came through 2 nights back, drunk and ranting, said you'd stolen from him, claimed you broke a contract. Laurel's jaw set. He bought a lie and got angry when it wouldn't stay quiet. Clara nodded slowly. I figured as much. He's been running his mouth trying to stir folk up, but not everyone listens. Sheriff's got no love for him, and the depot boss told him to keep to the saloon or stay gone. Laurel stepped back and opened the door wider. You want coffee? Clara hesitated, then stepped inside, stomping snow from her boots. Not many women speak plain like that. I appreciate it. They sat at the table, the fire warming their cheeks. Clara peeled off her gloves and wrapped her hands around the mug Laurel set before her. I left Kentucky 10 years ago, Clara said. Had a husband who thought the back of his hand made him a man. Took me 3 winters to save up and disappear. Since then, I've done what I could to help others do the same. Laurel folded her hands in her lap. I didn't expect anyone to come out here. I had to be sure you were all right. I am now. Clara studied her, then nodded. Good. Before she left, Clara passed her a folded square of paper. That's the name of a lawyer in Butte. If Griggs keeps pressing, this man can help you set things straight, quietly. I don't want to see him again. Then let's help make sure you don't have to. After Clara rode off, Laurel stood on the porch with the paper in her hand, the wind tugging at her sleeves. She didn't feel helpless anymore. She felt steady. Quillan returned just before dusk, hat dusted with grit and his coat smelling faintly of horses and cold iron water. He stepped inside and looked around, then toward her. You all right? She nodded, then reached for the pot on the stove. You hungry? He hung his coat and came to stand beside her. Always. Over supper, she told him about Clara, about the visit, about the warning. He listened without interrupting, then reached across the table and laid his hand over hers. You want to leave this place, we'll go. You want to stay, we'll stay, but you decide. I want to stay, she said, but not just here with you. Quillan's gaze didn't waver. Then that's settled. They rose from the table together, not rushed, not uncertain. He took her hand as they stepped outside into the cold dark. The stars were hard and bright above the hills, and the wind had finally died. She leaned into his side, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. I've been thinking, she said softly, about planting a garden come spring. He looked down at her. What kind? Carrots. Maybe beans, something with roots, he nodded. That suits, she smiled, her breath rising in white curls. It does. By mid-March, the land began to soften beneath their boots. The creek overflowed its banks where the ice had cracked apart, and the ground thawed into deep mud along the cattle paths. Laurel stood at the edge of the pasture with a length of twine in her pocket, and her hair pinned up tight to keep the wind from knotting it. She was measuring the garden plot, counting paces with a strip of hickory stick she'd notched that morning. Quillan had built a fence-post jig the week before, and now he stood a few yards off, driving the first stakes with a slow, even rhythm. Laurel watched the muscles in his back shift beneath his shirt, marked with sweat despite the chill. He looked up once, caught her eye, and gave a small nod, nothing more, but it settled something in her chest. I'll need burlap sacks to keep the soil warm at night, she said, stepping over a tangle of roots, and tin to edge the beds. It'll help keep the burrowers out. You think of everything, Quillan said. I try, she said. I've never made anything grow before, not really. But I want to learn. He rested one hand on the top of the post. We'll make it grow. That evening, after supper, she sat by the fire with a scrap of linen in her lap, stitching initials into a square of cloth. She dyed it with boiled walnut husks, and the brown thread showed just enough against the rough weave. Quillan sat across from her, sharpening the blade of his drawknife with a leather strop, the sound soft and rhythmic. I think I'd like to stay with you for good, she said, eyes on her hands. Not just because I feel safe, but because when I think of what I want next, it's here, and it's you. He set the blade down slowly. Laurel, I mean it, she said. I don't want to live waiting for the other boot to drop or looking over my shoulder. You've given me something I didn't think I'd have again. He crossed the room, crouched beside her, and set his hand over hers. You gave yourself that. I just made room for it. She looked down at their hands, then up into his eyes. Will you marry me? He blinked once, then let out a small breath. You'd take me on. I already have. He stood and drew her to her feet. Then yes. I will. They married 3 weeks later under the budding cottonwoods behind the cabin, with Clara standing beside Laurel and an old circuit preacher from Bitterroot Valley riding in to bless their vows. There were no rings, but Quillan had carved a comb from whitetail bone and gave it to her in place of gold. She'd braided it into her hair that morning and hadn't taken it out since. In the days that followed, the garden began to take shape. Laurel planted carrots and beans, just as she'd said, but also onions, turnips, and a patch of early peas. Quillan built a bench near the fence where she could rest her back in the afternoons. He started cutting lumber for a second shed, saying nothing about it, just hammering with quiet purpose. One evening, as they lay in bed, her cheek pressed against the hollow of his shoulder, she traced a scar along his ribs with the tip of her finger. Where's this from? She asked. Stampede, he said. First year out here, I was green. Didn't know how to read the herd. Does it still hurt? Only when it rains. She pressed a kiss to it. You're allowed to ache. I won't think you're weaker for it. His arm tightened around her. I know. Spring came in earnest by April, and with it the first shoots of green pushing up through the soil. Quillan took her into town only once that month, and Griggs was gone, vanished west according to Clara. No one missed him. Laurel stood taller now, her step sure. She wore her hair loose more often, and when she laughed, it reached her eyes. Quillan found himself watching her with quiet reverence, as though she were something rare and unexpected that had chosen, against all odds, to stay. On a warm morning in May, she came to him with a folded handkerchief and a quick smile. I think I'm carrying, she said. He didn't speak right away. Just drew her into his arms and held her there, his forehead resting against hers. They harvested their first beans in June. The child was born the following February, a girl with Laurel's dark eyes and Quillan's quiet mouth. They named her Anna Mee after Laurel's mother. Time passed slowly, as it does when life is full and the days are honest. The land gave what it could, and they took only what they needed. The cabin grew by one room, then two. Laurel's garden expanded each year, and by the third spring, she was trading preserves and dried herbs with the women down in the valley. Quillan taught Anna to ride when she turned 4, holding her steady in the saddle while Laurel watched from the porch with a hand over her heart. They grew old with the land, side by side. Wrinkles came and silver in the hair, and the ache in Quillan's ribs grew sharper in the wet seasons. But Laurel's hands stayed strong and her eyes never lost their clarity. They never spoke much of the past. There was no need. It had settled behind them like a long shadow at dusk, real, remembered, but no longer feared. They had each other. They had their child in the land and the life they'd built with careful hands and honest hearts. And that was enough. It was everything.